39. The theorem and the theater. The history of the voice and its writing is comprehended between two mute writings, between two poles of universality relating to each other as the natural and the artificial, the pictogram and algebra. The relationship of natural to artificial or arbitrary is itself subject to the law of extremes which touch one another. And if Rousseau suspects alphabetic writing without condemning it absolutely, it is because there are worse. From slash of the supplement to the source, it is structurally but the next to the last step of that history. Its artifice has a limit. Unbound to any particular language, it yet refers to the phone or language in general. As phonetic writing, it keeps an essential relationship to the presence of a speaking subject in general, to a transcendental locutor, to the voice as the self-presence of a life which hears itself speculk. In that sense, phonetic writing is not absolute evil. It is not the letter of death. Nevertheless, it announces death. To the extent that writing progresses with consonantic chilling, it allows the anticipation of the ice, speech degree 0, the disappearance of the vowel, the writing of a dead language. The consonant, which is easier to write than the vowel, initiates this end of speech in the universal writing. In algebra, it would be easy to construct a language consisting solely of consonants, which could be written clearly but not spoken. Algebra has something of such language. When the orthography of a language is clearer than its pronunciation, this is a sign that it is written more than it is spoken. This may have been true of the scholarly language of the Egyptians, as is the case for us with the dead languages. In those burdened with useless consonants, writing seems to have preceded speech, and who would doubt that such is the case with Polish? Essay, chap. 7p028. The universal characteristic, writing become purely conventional through having broken all links with the spoken language. Such then would be absolute evil. If the logic of Port Royal, Locke's essay, Malebranche, and Descartes, Leibniz was one of Rousseau's primary philosophic readings. Point 28. He is not cited in the essay but in the fragment on pronunciation. With as much suspicion as the art of Raymond Lully in Emile, p. 57.5, p. 42.5j. Languages are made to be spoken, writing serves only as supplement to speech. If there are some languages that are only written, and that one cannot speak, belonging only to the sciences, it would be of no use in civil life. Such is algebra. Such was no doubt the universal language that Leibniz looked for. It would probably have been more useful to a metaphysician than to an artisan. p. 1249. The universal writing of science would thus be absolute alienation. The autonomy of the representer becomes absurd, it has attained its limit and broken with all representatives, with all living origin, with all living present. In its supplementarity is accomplished, that is to say emptied. The supplement, which is neither simply the signifier nor simply the representer, does not take the place of a signified or a represented, as is prescribed by the concepts of signification or representation or by the syntax of the word signifier or representer. The supplement comes in the place of a lapse, a non-signified or a non-represented, a non-presence. There is no present before it, it is not preceding by anything but itself, that is to say by another. 304. Part 2, Nature, Culture, Writing Supplement. The supplement is always the supplement of a supplement. One wishes to go back from the supplement to the source, one must recognize that there is a supplement at the source. Thus it is always already algebraic. In its writing, the visible signifier has always already begun to separate itself from speech and to supplant it. The non-phonetic and universal writing of science is also in that sense a theorem. It is enough to look in order to calculate. As Leibniz said, ad vocem refera non est necess. Through that silent and mortal glance the complicities of science and politics are exchanged, more precisely of modem political science. The letter killeth, Emile, p. 226, po. 159. Where should one search, in the city, for that lost unity of glance and speech? In what space can one again listen to himself? Can the theater, which unites spectacle and discourse, not take up where the unanimous assembly left off? For a long time now one speaks in public only through books, and if one says something in person to the public that interests it, it is in the theater. Pronunciation, p. 1250. But the theater itself is shaped and undermined by the profound evil of representation. It is that corruption itself. For the stage is not threatened by anything but itself. Theatrical representation, in the sense of exposition, of production, of that which is placed out there, that which the German Darstellion translates, is contaminated by supplementary representation. The latter is inscribed in the structure of representation, in the space of the stage. Let us not be mistaken, what Rousseau criticizes in the last analysis is not the content of the spectacle, the sense represented by it, although that too he criticizes, it is representation itself. Exactly as within the political order, the menace has the shape of the representative. In fact, after having evoked the misdeeds of the theater considered in the content of what it stages, in its represented, the letter to D'Alembert incriminates representation and the representer. Beyond these effects of the theater, which are relative to what is performed representees, there are others no less necessary which relate directly to the stage and to the persons who perform representants, and it is to them that the previously mentioned Jean Vans attribute the taste for luxury, adornment, and dissipation, whose introduction among us they rightly fear. 29. Immorality, then, attaches, to the very status of the representer, performer. Vice is his natural bent. It is normal that he who has taken up representation as a profession should have a taste for external and artificial signifiers, and for the perverse use of signs. Luxury, fine clothes, and dissipation are not signifiers incidentally coming about here and there, they are the crimes of the signifier or the representer itself. Double consequence, from slash of the supplement to the source. 1. There are two sorts of public persons, two men of spectacle, on the one hand the orator or preacher, on the other the actor. The former represents himself, in him the representer and the represented are one. But the actor is born out of the rift between the representer and the represented. Like the alphabetic signifier, like the letter, the actor himself is not inspired or animated by any particular language. He signifies nothing. He hardly lives, he lends his voice. It is a mouthpiece. Of course the difference between the orator or preacher and the actor presupposes that the former does his duty, says what he has to say. If they do not assume ethical responsibility for their word, they become actors, hardly even actors, for the latter make a duty of saying what they do not think. The orator and the preacher, it could be said, make use of their persons as does the actor. The difference is, however, very great. When the orator appears in public, it is to speak and not to show himself off, he represents only himself, he views only his own proper role, speaks only in his own name, says, or ought to say, only what he thinks, the man and the role being the same being Aiden i.e. me madru, he is in his place, He is in the situation of any citizen who fulfills the functions of his estate. But an actor on the stage, displaying other sentiments than his own, saying only what he is made to say, often representing a chimerical being, annihilates himself, as it were, and is lost in his hero. And, in this forgetting of the man, if something remains of him, it is used as the plaything of the spectators, p. 187, italics added, pp. 80-81j. It is the best possible situation, the actor accepts the role and loves what he incarnates. The situation may be still worse. What shall I say of those who seem to be afraid of having too much merit as they are and who degrade themselves to the point of playing characters whom they would be quite distressed to resemble? Po 81. The identity of the representer and the represented may be accomplished in two ways. The better way, by the effacement of the representer and the personal presence of the represented, the orator, the preacher, or the worse way, it is not illustrated by the actor alone, representer emptied of what he represents, but by a certain society, that of the worldly Parisians who have, in order to find themselves there, alienated themselves in a certain theater of a theater, play representing the comedy of that society. It is nevertheless solely for these people that theatrical entertainments are made. They are represented by fictitious characters in the middle of the theater, and show themselves in real ones on each side. They are at once persons of the drama and the stage, and comedians in the boxes, La Nouvelle Heloise, p. 252. This total alienation of the represented within the representer is the negative aspect of the social pact. In both cases, the represented is reappropriated when he is lost without reserve in his representation. In what terms should the elusive difference which separates the positive from the negative aspect, the authentic social pact from a forever perverted theater, from a theatrical society, be defined? 2. The signifier is the death of the festival. The innocence of the public spectacle, the good festival, the dance around a water hole, would open a theater without representation. Or rather a stage without a show, without theater, with nothing to see. Visibility. A moment ago the theorem, here the theater is always that which, separating it from itself, breaches entum the living voice. But what is a stage which presents nothing to the sight? It is the place where the spectator, presenting himself as spectacle, will no longer be either seer voyant or voyeur, will efface within himself the difference between the actor and the spectator, the represented and the representer, the object seen and the seeing subject. With that difference, an entire series of oppositions will deconstitute themselves one by one. Presence will be full, not as an object which is present to be seen, to give itself to intuition as an empirical unit or as an eidos holding itself in front of or up against. It will be full as the intimacy of a self-presence, as the consciousness or the sentiment of self-proximity, of self-sameness propriam j. That public festival will therefore have a form analogous to the electoral meetings of a free and legiferent assembled people. The representative difference will be effaced in the self-presence of sovereignty. The exaltation of the collective festival has the same structure as the general will of the social contract. The description of public joy gives us the lyrical aspect of the general will. It is the aspect that it assumes in its Sunday best 30. The text is well known. It recalls the evocation of the festival in the essay. Let us reread it in order to recognize the desire of making representation disappear, with all the meanings that converge in that word, delay and delegation, repetition of a present in its sign or its concept, the proposition or opposition of a show, an object to be seen. What? Ought there to be no entertainments in a republic? On the contrary, there ought to be many. It is in republics that they were born, it is in their bosom that they are seen to flourish with a truly festive air. Letter to D. Allenberg, p. 125. These innocent spectacles will take place outdoors and they will have nothing effeminate or mercenary about them. The sign, money, ruse, passivity, and servility will be excluded from them. No one will use anyone, no one will be an object for anyone. There will no longer be, after a certain fashion, anything to see, from / of the supplement to the source. But what then will be the objects of these entertainments? What will be shown in them? Nothing, if you please. With liberty, wherever abundance reigns, well-being also reigns. Plant a stake crowned with flowers in the middle of a square, gather the people together there, and you will have a festival. Do better yet, let the spectators become an entertainment to themselves, make them actors themselves, do it so that each sees and loves himself in the other so that all will be better united. Letter to M. D'Alembert, pages 224-25 p. 126. We must note that this festival without object is also a festival without sacrifice, without expense, and without play. Above all without masks. 31 It has no outside although it takes place out of doors. It maintains itself in a purely interior relation to itself. So that each sees and loves himself in the others. In a certain way, it is confined and sheltered, whereas the hall of the theater, wrenched away from itself by the games and theatres of representation, diverted from itself and torn by difference, multiplies the outside in itself. There are many games within the public festival but no play at all, if one understands by that singular number the substitution of contents, the exchange of presences and absences, chance, and absolute risk. That festival represses the relationship with death, what was not necessarily implied in the description of the enclosed theater. These analyses can turn in both directions. At any rate, play is so much absent from the festival that the dance is admitted as the initiation into marriage and is contained within the closure of the ball. Such is at least the interpretation to which Rousseau submits, to fix it carefully, the meaning of his text on the festival. One could make him say quite a different thing. And Rousseau's text must constantly be considered as a complex and many-leveled structure. In it, certain propositions may be read as interpretations of other propositions that we are, up to a certain point and with certain precautions, free to read otherwise. Rousseau says A, then for reasons that we must determine, he interprets A into B. A, which was already an interpretation, is reinterpreted into B. After taking cognizance of it, we may, without leaving Rousseau's text, isolate A from its interpretation into B, and discover possibilities and resources there that indeed belong to Rousseau's text, but were not produced or exploited by him, which, for equally legible motives, he preferred to cut short by a gesture neither witting nor unwitting. In his description of the festival, for example, there are propositions which could very well have been interpreted in the sense of Antonin Artaud's 32 Theatre of Cruelty or of the Festival and Sovereignty of which Georges Baudelaire has proposed the concepts. But these propositions are interpreted otherwise by Rousseau himself, who transforms play into games and the dance into a ball, expense into presence. What ball are we speaking of here? To understand that, one must first understand the praise of the open air. The open air is undoubtedly nature and in that respect it must lead Rousseau's thoughts in 1,000 ways, through all the themes of pedagogy, promenade, botany, and so on. But more precisely, the open air is the element of the voice, the liberty of a breath that nothing breaks into pieces. A voice that can make itself heard in the open air is a free voice, a clear voice that the northern principle has not yet muzzled with consonants, not yet broken, articulated, compartmentalized, and which can reach the interlocutor immediately. The open air is frankness, the absence of evasions, of representative mediations among living spoken words. It is the element of the Greek city, the great concern of which was its liberty. The north limits the possibilities of the open air, your severer climates add to your needs, for half the year your public squares are uninhabitable, the flatness of your languages unfits them for being heard in the open air, you sacrifice more for profit than for liberty, and fear slavery less than poverty, the social contract, p. 431, po. 79, italics added. Once again the northern influence is pernicious. But a northern man must live like a northerner. To adopt or adapt southern customs in the north is pure folly and worse servitude, ibid. One must therefore find substitutes in the north or in winter. The winter substitute of the festival is our dance for young brides-to-be. Rousseau recommends the practice, unequivocally and as he himself says, without scruple, and what he says of winter illuminates after a fashion what he might have said of summer. Winter, a time consecrated to the private association of friends, is less appropriate to public festivals. There is, however, one sort concerning which I wish there were not so many scrupulous doubts raised, that is, the balls for young marriageable persons. I have never understood why people are so worried about dancing and the gatherings it occasions, as if there were something worse about dancing than singing, as if these amusements were not both equally an inspiration of nature, as if it were a crime for those who are destined to be united to be married together in a decent recreation. Man and woman were formed for one another. God wants them to fulfill their destiny, and certainly the first and holiest of all the bonds of society is marriage. 33 One should comment word by word on the long and edifying discourse that follows. A hinge articulates the entire argument, the full daylight of presence avoids the dangerous supplement. One must allow pleasures to a lively and frolicsome youth to avoid their substituting more dangerous ones and to prevent private meetings adroitly concerted from taking the place of public gatherings. Innocent joy is likely to evaporate in the full light of day, but vice is a friend of shadows. Letter to M.D. Alembert, p. 227, po. 129. Furthermore, the nudity that presents the body itself is less dangerous than the recourse to sartorial signifiers, to the northern subprom / of the supplement to the sourceplement, to artful dress. The latter is not less dangerous than an absolute nudity, the habit of which would soon turn the first effects into indifference and perhaps distaste. Is it not known that statues and paintings only offend the eyes when a mixture of clothing renders the nudity obscene? The immediate power of the senses is weak and limited. It is through the intermediary of the imagination that they make their greatest ravages. It is the business of the imagination to irritate the desires. p. 232, po. 134j. It will have been noticed that representation of picture rather than perception is chosen to illustrate the danger of the supplement whose efficiency is the imagination. And it will then be noticed that, in a note inserted into the heart of his praise of marriage, anticipating the errors of posterity, Rousseau makes only one exception to his denials. It is something amusing for me to imagine the judgments that many will make of my tastes on the basis of my writings. On the basis of this one they will not fail to say, that man is crazy about dancing, it bores me to watch dancing, he cannot bear the drama, I love the drama passionately, he has an aversion to women, on that score I shall be only too easily vindicated, p. 229, p. 0131n. Thus the north, winter, death, imagination, repressed untation, the irritation of desires. This entire series of supplementary significations does not designate a natural place or fixed terms, rather a periodicity. Seasons. In the order of time, or rather like time itself, they speak the movement by which the presence of the present separates from itself, supplants itself, replaces itself by absenting itself, produces itself in self-substitution. It is this that the metaphysics of presence as self-proximity wishes to efface by giving a privileged position to a sort of absolute now, the life of the present, the living present. The coldness of representation not only breaks self-presence but also the originarity of the present as the absolute form of temporality. This metaphysics of presence constantly reappears and is resumed in Rousseau's text whenever the fatality of the supplement seems to limit it. It is always necessary to add a supplement of presence to the presence that is concealed. The great remedy to the miseries of this world is absorption into the present moment, says Rousseau in the Solitaries. The present is originary, that is to say the determination of origin always has the form of presence. Birth is the birth of presence. Before it there is no presence, and from the moment that presence, holding or announcing itself to itself, breaches its plenitude and starts the chain of its history, death's work has begun. Birth in general is written as Rousseau describes his own, I cost my mother her life, and my birth was the first of my misfortunes, Confessions, p. 7, po. 5j. Every time that Rousseau tries to recapture an essence, in the form of an origin, a right, an ideal limit, he always leads us back to a point of full presence. He is less interested in the present, in the being present, than in the presence of the present, in its essence as it appears to itself and is retained in itself. Essence is presence. As life, that is as self-presence, it is birth. And just as the present goes out of itself only to return to itself, a rebirth is possible which, furthermore, is the only thing that permits all the repetitions of origin. Rousseau's discourse and questions are possible only in the anticipation of a rebirth or a reactivation of the origin. Rebirth, resurrection, or reawakening always appropriate to themselves, in their fugitive immediacy, the plenitude of presence returning to itself. That return to the presence of the origin is produced after each catastrophe, at least in so far as it reverses the order of life without destroying it. After a divine finger had turned the order of the world over reverse by inclining the axis of the globe on the axis of the universe and had thus willed that men be sociable, the festival around the waterhole was possible and pleasure was immediately present to desire. After a great Danish dog had knocked Jean-Jacques over reverse in the second promenade, when after the fall which had precipitated him, my head was thrown down lower than my feet, it was first necessary to recount to him the accident that he had not been able to experience. When he explains to us what happened at the moment when, he says twice, I came to myself, I came back to consciousness, it is indeed awakening as reawakening to pure presence that he describes, always according to the same model, not anticipation, not memory, not comparison, not distinction, not articulation, not situation. Imagination, memory, and signs are effaced. All landmarks on the physical or psychical landscape are natural. The state in which I found myself in that instant was too singular not to make a description of it here. The night was coming on. I perceived the sky, some stars, and a little grass. This first sensation was a delicious moment. I did not feel anything except through them. I was born in that instant to life, and it seemed to me that I find with my light existence all the objects which I perceived. Entirely given up to the present moment, I did not remember anything, I had no distinct notion of my individuality, not the least idea of what had happened to me, I did not know who I was nor where I was, I felt neither evil nor fear, nor trouble. And, as around the water hole, and on the Isle of Saint Pierre, the enjoyment essence of pure presence is that of a certain flow. Presence being born. Origin of life, blood's resemblance to water. Rousseau continues, I saw my blood flowing as I might have looked at a brooklet, without dreaming even that this blood in any way belonged to me. I felt in the whole of my being a ravishing calm, to which, each time that I think of it, I find nothing comparable in the whole action of known pleasures, p. 1005, p. 049. From / of the supplement to the source are there other or more archetypal pleasures. This pleasure, which is the only pleasure, is at the same time properly unimaginable. Such is the paradox of the imagination, it alone arouses or irritates desire but also it alone, and for the same reason, in the same movement, extends beyond or divides presence. Rousseau would like to separate the awakening to presence from the operation of imagination, he always presses on toward that impossible limit. For the awakening of presence projects or rejects us immediately outside of presence where we are led by that living interest, foresightful and all-providing prévoyant et pourvoyant, which always throws us far from the present, and which does not exist for natural man. Dialogues. Point 34 Function of representation. Imagination is also the temporalizing function, the excess of the present and the economy of what exceeds presence. There is no unique and full present, but is there presence then? Except in the imagination sleep, the sleeping imagination does not know at all how to extend its being into two different times. Emile, p. 69. When it appears, signs, fiduciary values, legal tender and trusts, and letters emerge, and they are worse than death. How many merchants lament in Paris over some misfortune in India? There is a healthy, cheerful, strong, and vigorous man, it does me good to see him. A letter comes by post. He falls into a swoon. When he comes to himself he weeps, laments, and groans, he tears his hair, and his shrieks re-echo through the air. You would say he was in convulsions. Fool, what harm has this bit of paper done you? What limb has it torn away? We no longer live in our own place, we live outside it. What does it profit me to live in such fear of death, when all that makes life worth living remains? Emile, pp. 67-68, p. 47 Rousseau himself articulates this chain of significations, essence, origin, presence, birth, rebirth, on the classical metaphysics of the entity as energy, encompassing the relationships between being and time in terms of the now as being in action, energia, delivered from the disquietude of hope, and sure of thus gradually losing that of desire, seeing that the past was no longer anything to me, I undertook to put myself completely in the situation of a man who begins to live. I told myself that in fact we were always beginning, and that there was no other link in our existence but a succession of present moments of which the first is always that which is in action. We are born and die every moment of our life. It follows but it is a liaison that Rousseau works very hard to alight that the very essence of presence, if it must always be repeated within another presence, opens originarily, within presence itself, the structure of representation. And if essence is presence, there is no essence of presence nor presence of essence. There is a play of representation and alighting that liaison or that consequence. Rousseau places play out of play, he alludes, which is another way of playing, or rather, as the dictionaries say, a playing, with. What is thus alluded is the fact that representation does not suddenly encroach upon presence, it inhabits it as the very condition of its experience, of desire, and of enjoyment, Jouissance J. The entire doubling of presence, its having, makes it appear as such, that is to say, concealing enjoyment in frustration, makes it disappear as such. Placing representation outside, which means placing the outside outside, Rousseau would like to make of the supplement of presence a pure and simple addition, a contingence, thus wishing to elude what, in the interior of presence, calls forth the substitute, and is constituted only in that appeal, and in its trace. Thence the letter. Writing is the evil of representative repetition, the double that opens desire and contemplates and binds regard j enjoyment. Literary writing, the traces of the confessions, speak that doubling of presence. Rousseau condemns the evil of writing and looks for a haven within writing. It repeats enjoyment symbolically. And just as enjoyment has never been present except in a certain repetition, so writing, recalling enjoyment, gives it as well. Rousseau eludes its admission but not the pleasure. We recall those texts, saying to myself I have rejoiced, I rejoice again. I rejoice again in a pleasure that no longer is. Incessantly occupied with the thought of my past happiness, I recall it, so to speak, chew the cud of it to such an extent that, when I desire it, I am able to enjoy it over again, po 607j. Writing represents, in every sense of the word, enjoyment. It plays enjoyment, renders it present and absent. It is play. And it is because it is also the good fortune of enjoyment repeated that Rousseau practices it while condemning it. I shall set down in writing those delightful contemplations j which may still come to me, each time that I reread them will give me new pleasure. Reveries, p. 999, po 38j. This entire digression was necessary in order to mark well that, unless some extrinsic desire is invested in it, Leibniz's universal characteristic represents the very death of enjoyment. It leads the representer to the limit of its excess. Phonetic writing, however abstract and arbitrary, retains some relationship with the presence of the represented voice, to its possible presence in general and therefore to that of a certain passion. A writing that breaks with the phone radically is perhaps the most rational and effective of scientific machines, it no longer responds to any desire or rather it signifies its death to desire. It was what already operated within speech as writing and machine. It is the representer in its pure state, without the represented, or without the order of the represented naturally linked to it. That is why this pure conventionality ceases, being pure, to be of any use within civil life, which always mingles nature and convention. The perfection of convention here touches its opposite extreme, it is death and the perfect alienation of the instrument of civil order. The telos of the from / of the supplement to the source 313 alienation of writing has in Rousseau's eyes the form of scientific or technical writing, wherever it can act, that is to say even outside of the areas reserved for science or technology. It is not by chance that in mythology, the Egyptian in particular, the god of sciences and technologies is also the god of writing, and that it is he, Thoth, Theoth, Tuthus, or his Greek homologue Hermes, god of the ruse, of trade, and of thieves, whom Rousseau incriminates in the discourse on the arts and sciences. Plato had already denounced his invention of writing at the end of the Phaedrus, an ancient tradition passed out of Egypt into Greece, that some god, who was an enemy to the repose of mankind, was the inventor of the sciences star. In fact, whether we turn to the annals of the world, or supplement with philosophical investigations the uncertain chronicles of history, we shall not find for human knowledge an origin answering to the idea we are pleased to entertain of it at present. Their evil origin is indeed, but too plainly reproduced in their objects. Cole, op. cit. p. 131.j*. It is easy to see the allegory in the fable of Prometheus, and it does not appear that the Greeks, who chained him to the Caucasus, had a better opinion of him than the Egyptians had of their god Tethys.